Azema, highest god of dragons,
Dragons? I'm gonna dragging these dead orcs across Ulos.
shall open rifts to other planes.
Yo, you gonna give us some new prosperous lands?
Yeah, when I'm done with my works.
Huh?
Until then, the other gods shall place wages on you.
Like betting on us mortals? Oh. Tonight, Rolling with the Beard, we're reviewing Dawn of Ulos. This is Dawn of Ulos, and it takes place in the Roll Player universe. It is a tile-laying economic game for 1 to 5 players, taking roughly an hour, maybe 2 hours if you're still learning. And this game is heavy. Literally, the game box weighs in at over 5 pounds. Luckily, the game, though, isn't that difficult to teach. It's quite simple, actually. Players receive a hand of 3 tiles, and on their turn, they will simply place one of the tiles anywhere on the board. It doesn't have to be adjacent to anywhere. However, the terrain types underneath do have to match the board. And then once a player places those on there, they check and see if a couple things have happened. One, they check to see if it establishes a camp. So there's 5 different factions that are used each game. The box actually comes with a whole bunch of different factions that you can mix up, which is awesome because the factions play differently and they have different special abilities. So every time you play the game, it really spices it up, mixing up the different factions. So I checked to see if it created a camp for one of the factions. Now this shape does happen to match the shape of the goblins. So I take the goblins and put them out on the board. Now, the goblins have now gone from a lost race, or a lost faction, to a discovered one, with a territory value of 0. We'll get to that in just a second, but they have a strength of 2 and spoils of 2. So now, the next thing I can do during my turn is I can take one of 2 actions. One of them is use an ability on a card, which I don't have any cards currently because it's early in the game, or I can buy cards. So essentially you're buying shares of these factions that everyone at the table is making grow on the board. So don't get too attached to any one of them though, because somebody might start buying a whole bunch of goblin shares as well as myself. So you never know. So at the end of my turn, I can buy up to 3 cards. So I think I'm going to buy 3 goblins. And currently they cost $2 each. So I can spend 2, 4, $6. Turn in $6, or favor as it's called in the game, back to the bank. So now I have 3 goblin shares, if you will. And then at the end of my turn, I simply draw a tile. Simple enough. Now my next turn might come around, and I might take this tile here and place it right next to these goblins. Now remember, the different factions have different terrain types that makes them stronger and boost. So the goblins happen to like the forest area, which is conveniently depicted on their miniature. So for every adjacent forest space, they increase in power too. So now the goblins just went from a strength of 2 to a strength of 4 and a spoils of 2 to a spoils of 4. So those cards that I just purchased are worth more favor. Now after I place that tile, again at the end of my turn, I can either buy up to 3 cards from any of the factions, or I can use one of my goblin cards for its special effect. And when I turn this in, for every 2 goblin strength, a chosen opponent must reveal 1 random card. Gain the spoils value of the strongest faction revealed. So the goblins have a strength of 4. So in this case, a chosen opponent would have to reveal 2 cards, and then I could choose one to receive the spoils value of it. Now should we reach a point like this, where this tile would cause the 2 territories between 2 factions to touch, now what we do is we actually just put that face down for now, and now these 2 factions are in a conflict. So going around the table now, players would secretly choose some of the cards from their hand, basically to kind of help buff the strength of each faction. So I might have played these for the goblins, this player here may have played these, and you can play cards from both factions. It doesn't really matter, because what happens is now we reveal them, so the goblins have a strength of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and the satyr have a strength of 5, 6, 7. So in this case, even on the power board, they were higher, still more goblin cards got played to buff up their strength. So now the goblins have won that conflict. So what happens now is this flips over, and these guys go back to being a lost civilization. And then now we raise up the goblin power to match their new territory that they just acquired. So now the goblins are much more powerful, or have more favor, or more valuable. The cards that were used in the conflict, each player has to get rid of half rounded up as a minimum of the cards that they played. They do, however, get to take the spoils value for the cards, and they get the value prior to them raising or lowering on the power track. So basically, lay tiles, build camps, see if there's conflicts, buy cards, use the cards for their special abilities, buy low, sell high, don't get too attached to any one faction, and try to get the most favor by the end of the game. And that is Dawn of Ulos in a nutshell. Whoa, this is a good game. It's kind of bizarre, so it is easy to teach. It's pretty straightforward. Now, even though it's easy to teach, and I experience this, and most players that I've taught experience this, your first game, wrapping your head around the strategy on this game is pretty tough at first. Obviously, you want to buy low and sell high like any other economic, trading game. But just when you see what the other players are doing, it's almost like a little bit of overload. Just the first game you play it. But then after that, it's a lot of fun because you got to be very flexible in this game. You can't just really stick with one strategy. You have to react to what all the other players do, and then you can watch them react to the things that you do. And you might notice that maybe one player just keeps buying a ton of orcs. So you would take that information and think, well, maybe I'll get in on this orc game too, because maybe he's going to make the orcs grow and make their faction become even bigger. So there's just a lot of player interaction, which I personally love in a game. There's nothing I dislike more than a game that kind of feels like a solo experience that everyone's just sharing around the table. So I do really appreciate the insane, and it doesn't even have to have a lot of player interaction, which is another thing that is crazy about this game, is every time you play it can vary wildly. Like, we played one game, it was a 5-player game, and everyone was just kind of skittish, and we're like, well, maybe we won't have any conflicts. We almost made it all the way to the end of the game before there was, a whole crap storm of conflicts at the end. But it was really interesting because we thought that we were actually going to make the game all the way through without any conflicts. But there was one player around the table, may or may not have been myself, the self-proclaimed lover of player interaction, did force a conflict, and then the game did take a drastic turn from that point. In a good way, though. A very exciting way. So this game really shines with the right group if you're doing table talk and paying attention to what other people are doing. The theme somehow works, with all the different factions. At heart, though, it is an abstract game, but it does take place in the Roll Player universe, and they did somehow find a way to make it make sense. Now, all the different factions that you can mix in there, wow, those can greatly change the outcome of the game as well. Because some of the factions, for instance, the rat folk, they allow you to play another tile. So you can kind of, change the pace of the game. So, and when you play one of the cards of a faction, you do get the spoils for it too. So maybe you think, maybe these rat folk aren't doing that great. Maybe I could see the orcs or something coming around the corner. Maybe they're going to poop all over the value of the rat faction. So maybe I should play these rat cards to lay more tiles, but also to get rid of those cards out of my hand and get the spoils for them while they're still worth more. And then the orcs, for instance, they can pillage and they can go around, and the orcs can actually place little cubes on other factions' territories, which negates that faction's power on the power track. There's just so many of them. The Frogkin, they allow you to buy an extra card during your turn, or maybe multiple, depending on how powerful the Frogkin are at that time. So, you can start maybe buying a ton of a faction that maybe just was discovered at a really cheap price. There's just so much variety at this game, and it plays great every time, and it's easy to teach. But be mindful, though, the first game, you're going to see a lot of players sitting at the table kind of like, well, I know how to play, but I have no idea what I should do. And probably what I suggest for your first game is just, make it known to everyone that there's going to be a lot of stuff going on, a lot of, maybe clashing heads and stuff, but let's just play, get through our first game, and then let's go back and then go hard in the paint, or hard in the Ulos, or however they say it. And on top of all that, too, there's also these little rift tiles that give you a nice little bump, that you can use a special power later on in the game. You don't have to play or build adjacent to factions' territories. You can just put tiles out anywhere. So you're kind of burning a turn sometimes to get one of those little rift tiles, but it might end up helping you because you can use that ability, later on at the right time. And the production value on this game is ridiculous. It's so good. The art in typical role player universe fashion is fantastic. The cardboard pieces, all the tiles, they're nice chunky tiles. The board is very interesting. I don't know how they came up with this bizarro shape, but that's also another thing that makes it different every time, is the board will be different every time. So you shuffle up those 6 tiles, you do have to lay them in a 2x3. I mean, the rules say you do. So, I guess you could still maybe make a bizarre shape, and maybe you could play with even more than 5 factions if you just want to get totally crazy. But in all seriousness, though, I really am usually not a fan of house rules, but sometimes, But I don't know how they came up with that shape, that it's such a funky shape, yet, which is great because those board tiles interlock into each other and they don't get bumped around. They stay nice and tight together. I did upgrade to the metal coins, which these are some of the prettiest and best metal coins I've ever seen in the game. Not necessary, but the game is really good, so might be worth it. So in recap, it's easy to teach. Strategy hurts your brain though at first. Lots of player interaction if you want there to be, or if one player at the table wants there to be. And it has so much replayability. Definitely staying in my Beard's collection. I highly suggest it. And if you found this episode entertaining or informative at all, please consider clicking that subscribe button and the notification bell. And join us again. And thanks again for watching another episode of Rolling with the Beard.